Sure. Yeah.
All right, thank you for showing up for our event at the Hellenic Studies program at Macmillan Center, Yale University. I'm Kairos Lanidis. I'm a lecturer of political science, and we have the honor of having Natalie here with us. Natalie Alkiviadou is a senior research fellow at Danish think tank Justitia. She holds a PhD in law from is it University in Amsterdam?
Yeah,
Okay, great.
well done.
Thank you. Her research interests lie in the freedom of expression, the far right, hate speech, hate crime, and non-discrimination. And she started working on the freedom of expression and hate speech at the project titled Future of Free Speech, which is a collaboration between Justitia, the University of Aarhus, and the University of Columbia University, right? Natalie has, apart from her academic exploration, she also has over 10 years experience in working with civil society, educators and public servants on human rights education. She has published on hate speech, free speech and the far right in a wide range of peer-reviewed journals. And of course, she has 3 monographs, one of which is central for today. Her first monograph was titled Legal Challenges to the Far Right, Lessons from England and Wales. The second book she published was titled The Far Right in International and European Law. And the third one is focused on Greece, and it's titled The Far Right in Greece and the Law. So this is more or less the topic for today. We know that the far right has a very long history in Greek politics, going back to even prior to the Second World War. But we had an upsurge of far right activism and of course an electoral success of the far right during the crisis, the recent crisis in Greece, starting after more or less 2011, 2012. But I'm a political scientist. I don't know much about the legal aspect of the phenomenon. Currently, we have trials going on still on the Golden Dawn issue. I don't think we're near the end of this, phenomenon, anywhere near that. But Natalie will inform us about the legal framework that is used to more or less assess and sometimes indict far-right politics, both at the level of Greek law, but also at the level of international law. So I think I talked too much. Natalie, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would you like me to help? Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me here at the Centre. It's a real honour, and actually it's the first place that I'm presenting some of the findings of my latest monograph. So I'm very happy for that. So what I want to do today, I've got like 25-30 minutes. Yeah, it's difficult to go over everything in 25 or 30 minutes. I just want to pick up some key points when it comes to what happened with Golden Dawn in Greece. Very briefly, its rise, a little bit of its history, and then the treatment by both the state and subsequently the courts. As Paris mentioned, we now have the appeal process ongoing. So it's just a never-ending story of a very bitter situation. So hang on. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And along with this context and short history, I'm going to give you very briefly an overview of what kind of law Greece has and Greece had to tackle the phenomenon of the far right, and what international and European law, because Greece as a state party to the United Nations and a member state of the European Union and the Council of Europe, has certain obligations under international and European law when it comes to the far right, and particularly its manifestations in relation to hate speech and hate crime. And I'll tell you what I mean in a bit. So Golden Dawn, I mean, most of my slides are just key points so you could follow since we're not all together in a room. It started off as a magazine. So the leader of Golden Dawn, Michalogiannis, who has been jailed for, although he's appealing it now, for running a criminal organization, had met George Papadopoulos in prison. Michalogiannis had gone in for some bombing, and he ended up in prison for some time, and he became a friend of Papadopoulos. Papadopoulos then set up, I think I've got it here for you, if not, I'll just tell you. Yeah, he set up a party, a far-right party, which Michalogiannis led, the youth wing of that party. After a bit of a pickle between Papadopoulos and Michalogiannis then joined the 4th of August party with a quite infamous revisionist in Greece, Konstantinos Levis, who's gave a Nazi salute in court a couple of days ago. Now, the interesting thing is when Michalogiannis left all these different frameworks, he started Golden Dawn as a magazine. And I remember in one of the magazines he said, it's somewhere in the book, the exact quotes, we've done this in a Marxist-Leninist way. We're going to start with a magazine. These magazines, for an academic or anyone who's interested in Greek history or generally the far right or just has general interest in situations of things about the world, are absolutely fascinating to read. Of course, I don't promote their content, but they are very, very interesting. And this is where the big issue of freedom of expression comes in the handling of entities such as Golden Dawn. Because there is a lot of argumentation that, for example, those magazines are racist, which they are fascist, which they are aggressively nativist, which they are, but we do need access in order to have the profile of this organization built as we needed it for the court case, right? Without this material, we wouldn't be able to build the profile that the court subsequently accepted. So that's just a couple of interesting pieces of information that sometimes they go disregarded, but I think it's interesting to know how it all started. Now, because Golden Dawn, I don't know what tense I should use, I'm not really sure. Legally speaking, let's call it an is, because the appeal is ongoing. Forget the political kind of support at the moment. But Golden Dawn is a very, very, very rigidly structured entity with the leader and then everybody else. That is the heart and soul of the functioning of Golden Dawn and the heart and soul of the functioning of other things like the Nazi party in Germany and things like that. I'm not going to go into details that most of you may already know, for example, their symbol and their salutes and whatever, but maybe another time. Now, the next thing I want to tell you, which is kind of interesting context, is the case of Periandros, Antonis and Routledge. In 1996, there was 10 members of a leftist group, and they were giving out leaflets in Athens. And I put some info. I can also share this with any participant. And a couple of guys passed on a bike and saw them, and then came back with another, or one guy passed with another, like 13, 14 men. Some of them had Golden Dawn signs on their jackets. And they attacked the people who were giving out these leftist leaflets with bats. One of the persons was so very, very deeply hurt. He's now an academic. I think he's in Austria. Yeah, where is he? He's an academic in Austria, I think. Aggressive violence. Anyhow, and what the victims of the assault did, they filed a lawsuit and they said, this organization is not just anything, it's a criminal organization. You need to do something. We have Article 187 of the Criminal Code, and now we're talking about the 90s, yeah? Why don't you do something? And I put a quote from the victims. This is a gang organized into a group in which there are political leaders, instigators, and organizers of the attacks. That is, leaders of the gang and their executive arm, the iron hand that executes the plan, abuses, attacks, and may kill tomorrow, they warned. And their warning, of course, did materialize. At that point in time, the prosecutor did not want to take action on Golden Dawn. And I will come back to this, but that's also an interesting thing. When I found out, I thought, cool, well, not cool, but it was interesting. Now, a little bit more context. So we have a bit of the history. I'm not going to sit and give you all the statistics on political participation and how well they did and how badly they did and how they rose and how they fell. I would suggest that a colleague of ours, mostly your colleague, Antonis Elinas, he has all the statistics from the beginning of time in terms of their electoral success. So if you're interested in reading more on the political aspect of Golden Dawn, then I definitely suggest him. I'm not biased because he's from Cyprus, but he is the one who's looking at the party the most. But I'll give you this one, which is quite interesting. There was a rise in the activity of Golden Dawn. This is wrong. This should be 2000. Should not be 2021. Hang on. Should be 16. But anyway, I'll tell you what I mean. There was a rise in the activity and political participation of Golden Dawn. It started off mostly in the Ios Panteleimon area of Athens, which is an area inhabited by many immigrants, undocumented migrants, people with a very, very difficult daily existence because of either the social welfare system, access to jobs, access to the labor market. And Golden Dawn tapped into this fear that was created by the mainstream parties anyway, and started gaining electoral support. And this is where I want to stress something very, very important. That May should say 2016. I apologize, I don't know how to change it. Now, when they gained 21 seats in those elections, it was an electoral earthquake. And the important thing that I'd like to note is that we academics or political commentators or journalists, we use the word populism very, very easily. But I think it's very important to underline the differentiation between a right-wing populist party that we see very often in Europe, whether that's in Italy, whether that's in Sweden, whether that's in France, and Golden Dawn. Yeah, there is a very big difference. Because Golden Dawn was a party which was a political party, duly registered as such. It was, at the same time, what can be referred to as a subculture milieu, so that they were acting on the underground. They had they had established hit squads, particularly throughout the region of Athens, but also in other areas, whether that be Crete, whether that be Thessaloniki. They were very, very militarized and organized in their attacks during the evening, late evening and nighttime. And then during the day, they would be a political party in parliament and whatever else. So it's very, very important to understand the dual nature of Golden Dawn. And this is very relevant to the constitution of Greece, why it could act as it did. We'll get to that in a minute. So that's the one thing I want to say, the electoral shock that came just 3 or 4 years after the big crisis hit Greece, financial crisis. And here is the next point. Many several scholars who are also my friends, so no need to make name. They do blame the rise of Golden Dawn very much on the financial crisis that hit Greece. Okay, the financial crisis, but also the crisis. I don't like the term crisis in relation to this, but I'll use it for purposes of explaining in terms of immigration policy and the situation with immigrants. The thing is that I wouldn't just afford the rise of such a violent far-right party on an economic crisis. Definitely we could see that any crisis can contribute to the rise in extreme activity. But we did not see something as equivalent to Golden Dawn in other countries of particularly the South that were hit by the financial crisis. So that's another thing that has to be taken into account. One of the very important things, now we do see this in other countries. I mean, if I had more time, I'd also show you some videos I've made with one politician talking and then Natalie Alkiviadou talking, and just how much the mainstream right party tried to echo the rhetoric of Golden Dawn when they started realizing that they were losing the votes to Golden Dawn. And if you look at the electorate of Golden Dawn, it was mostly people who had left the conventional right party, but we do have people from socialist backgrounds and whatever. There's very, very interesting documentaries about the electorate of the Golden Dawn if you'd like to watch. So what I want to say here is that yes, we have to acknowledge the financial crisis in Greece, but we also have to take and this is in order to prevent things from happening in the future, and in order to see how this bitter story is going to end, we need to be very aware just how violent and just how tragic the activities of Golden Dawn in Greece were. I didn't take time.
We'll do, don't worry about it.
Okay, just so I know when I've got 5. All right. Now, in the 90s, we had 2 major events. We had the case of Periandros that I mentioned before, and the prosecutor saying, no, we're not going to activate Article 187. And we also had discussion in the parliament, in the Greek parliament, whereby people started getting worried about this group. They didn't have the militarized hit squads they had in 13 and 14 and 15, but they started to get more organized and be more violent. And there are minutes from the 90s, minutes of meeting of the parliament, whereby the Communist Party of Greece is so fearful about prohibiting Golden Dawn, because there was that discussion. And the whole idea being that this is not the new Greece. We, i.e. the Communist Party of Greece, had been through so much prohibition, drifting in and out of legality since 1918 for about 30 years. So they were so fearful of bringing this kind of practice and dogma into the new Greek reality again. That's one thing that I want to mention. I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just trying to extrapolate on why, because someone may say, okay, did Greece just not care for all those years, the rise of the far right and the violence and whatever? There are certain political aspects in Greek history and in the birth of the new Greek state following the junta or the regime or however you want to call it, that have deeply impacted this particular situation and the treatment of Golden Dawn, right? That's the one thing. The second thing, which is very important, is who are the victims of Golden Dawn? I'll keep the present. Of course, the victims have gone down compared to what they were, but I'll keep the present tense. They were predominantly immigrants or anyone who appeared to be an immigrant. One person who was very, very beaten very seriously by Golden Dawn and is left with lifelong changes is a Cypriot who they perceive to be Pakistani. So it was their perception of the immigration that they don't like. Because Golden Dawn, as other far-right parties, are okay with some kind of immigration, but not others. So there's in one of the documentaries, a prominent member of Golden Dawn is saying, I'm fine with Russians and Bulgarians. They're not coming and they're working and they have families and they're not going to ruin my skin color. So that's the issue of immigration. Who else could be a target for Golden Dawn, and who was? Activists, people working in NGOs, people supporting immigrants, the LGBTQ plus community. Anything alternative essentially at some point became a target of Golden Dawn. When it comes, however, to groups such as undocumented migrants living in the turmoil of the situation, think about it, how difficult or easy it would be for them to actually go to the police and report that they were a victim of crime. They had no papers, so the question of underreporting, particularly when it came to undocumented migrants, is an issue. The other issue is that when people did go to report, we had the police being very, very difficult, let's say, about recording racist motivations. And in one major study that was made around 2013-14, the police force in the Attica region was very, very prone to voting for Golden Dawn. So those are some factors. Institutions such as the the Council of Against Racism and Intolerance of the Council of Europe, the Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union, the UNHCR, the UN Agency for Refugees, they all underlined this problem about not recording a racist motive or homophobic motive or whatever else. And what the UNHCR did in collaboration with civil society in Greece, they set up a recording line where they recorded just how many racist crimes were going on every month. And we had months with thousands and thousands of victims of Golden Dawn. And that's just, as the Commissioner for Human Rights in Greece said at the time, the ombudsperson, she said, what was it, he at the time? Can't remember. That was only the tip of the iceberg, was verbatim in terms of how many people were victims of Golden Dawn. The other thing that's very important in understanding the rise of Golden Dawn and the way it's turned out is the actual constitution. Oh no, I won't tell you about the constitution of Golden Dawn. Yes, we have the formal constitution which they deposited at the Supreme Court to register as a political party, which is fine, it reads fine. And then we have the secret constitution, which was deposited and accepted by the courts during the trial of the party as the real constitution. And this constitution is, it's available, I could also send it over. Dimitris Psaras, who is a journalist in Greece and has worked endlessly and tirelessly on Golden Dawn, has written an entire book about this constitution. It's all about the leader, it's all about the Aryan blood, it's all about the values of Greece, it's all about the salute, it's all about, these aggressively nativist aspects. So we've got several years of Golden Dawn. It was a magazine, and then it slightly got a little bit more organized. Then in '96, it attacked the group of the leftist students, and we started getting a little bit more organized. But then we had several years from about 2008 of extreme violence on the streets of Athens, where if you were an NGO activist, I'll give that as the example, you were afraid. If you were an immigrant, you were afraid. And this is, we have, recorded statistics, we have witnesses. It is an issue. plethora of institutions, ECRI, FRA, other institutions, particularly in Europe, were saying to the government and the UN, this cannot go on. You need to stop this violence. Nothing was done. And I think it's too extreme just to say, oh, nothing was done, the Greek state was useless and they just let them be. So it's not like that. And we're going to turn to that after this slide. But nothing was done. That's what we want to discuss now. In January of 2013, Shahzad Luqman, he was a Pakistani, he worked in Greece. He was sacking to work at like 5, so it must have been dark at that point. January 5, yes, it was dark. And he was stabbed by 2 members of Golden Dawn. And when the police went to his house, their houses, the killers, they found, you know, the leaflets of Golden Dawn and whatever. Nothing was done. They then attacked in Piraeus, a home with Egyptian fishermen, with one very, very battered victim, one who was sleeping on the roof. It was very hot, and this hit squad tried to get in through the door. They knew that Egyptian fishermen were living there, so they wanted to go and attack, but the door was metal, they couldn't break it down, so they went up through the roof and they found the guy who was resting up on the roof, and they battered him. You will notice that, unlike others, I don't use pictures even of the people who were killed by Golden Dawn or injured, because I don't actually know if they would like that. And but you can read more on them and online, and then I'll give you different resources. And I don't want to fill out my PowerPoint. This is just a side note with horrible signs I don't really want to look at, but you can still get the idea of what I mean by Golden Dawn and how they functioned. Because there's a very, very viral photo of the Egyptian fishermen who were awfully beaten. Anyway, nothing was really going on. And then in September of 2013, Pavlos Fyssas, an ethnic Greek, he was an anti-fascist rapper, musician. He was killed by them. It was an organized killing of a leftist person. There's a great documentary of the university, it's a London university, I can't remember exactly, which has done the precise restructuring of that day, how it went, what happened, the telephone calls to the police, etc. So that's interesting to watch. Now, once Pavlos Fyssas was killed, things started to change and the crackdown by the state started. And that's when we started getting Article 187 into play of the Criminal Code, which basically prohibits the establishment or running of a criminal organization, etc., etc. When the crackdown of Golden Dawn started after the murder of Pavlos Fyssas, they also reintegrated or reconsidered the other activities, specifically the attacks on the Egyptian fishermen that I mentioned, and another attack on a leftist union. And they were found guilty. They went to jail, so a couple have come out, and now we have an appeal. That's shortly, in a nutshell, the history of Golden Dawn. But I'm here to tell you a couple of important things, or to share with you a couple of important things in terms of the law. I'll only take a few minutes. So Article 29 of the Greek Constitution, and I want you to bear in mind very much the history of Greece and the regime of colonels and all that. And Article 29 of the Constitution says that anyone can vote, anyone can be part of the Democratic Party, any citizen of Greece, so not anyone, any citizen of Greece, insofar as the party is serving the free functioning of democracy, right? Which Golden Dawn evidently was not serving. However, there are no checks and balances, there are no processes or sanctions or procedures in order to monitor and see whether political parties are actually fulfilling the requirements of Article 29. And if you take that constitution and you compare it, for example, with the German constitution, which is heavily impacted by the doctrine of militant democracy, you can see that variation. But if we take it historically, we see why the German constitution and the Greek constitution may be different. Also, there are no substantial registration requirements. You do need to sign a declaration pledging allegiance to certain principles like the free functioning of democracy. But as the Council of Europe Commissioner of Human Rights had noted at the time, this procedure is not actually used to verify the lawfulness of the party. You have a couple of exceptions. Someone tried to register with some symbol of the Junta or whatever, and that wasn't allowed. But what I'm trying to say, there is no formal process to overlook what kind of parties are functioning in Greece. So that's the one aspect, the constitutional aspect. And the second aspect is that while all this was going on, what I had explained before very briefly, Greece did have its anti-racist law, 972, which prohibits hate speech, prohibits hate crimes and whatever else. It was seldom used, okay? So that's what I would say very briefly on the national level. Do I have like 5 minutes?
Of course.
Okay. The other very important thing, when the state started cracking down on Golden Dawn, a lot of people, including civil society and other nations and institutions, asked the very good question of why now? Is it just because a Greek was killed? There's graffiti in Athens in the center which says, if you had, how did it say it? Basically it says, if you had taken Shehzad's death seriously, Pavlos would still be alive. It was symbolic that because they just ignored the immigrant that it's somewhere in the center. Anyway, but the European Court of Human Rights, Article 11 of the Convention, which binds Greece because it's a member of the Council of Europe, unlike Russia, says that we have the freedom of association and assembly, but it's not absolute. As with the freedom of expression, we don't have any equivalent to what you have in the US of the First Amendment in Europe, because again, of our very different history when it comes to free speech. And in terms of freedom of association, the European Court of Human Rights dealt with 2 really interesting cases that are relevant to what we're talking about. One being Refah Partisi versus Turkey. This had to do with the functioning of an Islamic party that wanted to reinstate Sharia law. And the other had to do with, it's the case of Batasuna versus Spain. It had to do with ETA. And in both cases, the European Court of Human Rights said these parties do not fulfill the requirements of Article 11 in terms of their legitimacy, but they were very cautious of the fact, and they told the member states or states parties to be very careful of timing. When do you ban a political party? If at all, yeah? Do you ban it, because do you ban it when? Before we even have any signs, then on what grounds do we do it? How do we know the Constitution is actually reflecting what they want to do? Do we ban them at their peak? What's going to happen? Will it move underground? So that's a huge topic, but it's something that was also affecting the situation in Greece. I think these are just, I'll tell you briefly, an example of how political speech is treated by the European Court of Human Rights, which again should impact the way states parties deal with things. So we have the case of Ferret versus Belgium. He was the leader, I think he was, of the National Front like we have in France, the National Front, in Belgium, giving out very racist leaflets, being Islamophobic, bringing this anti-immigrant rhetoric, but was never actually calling for violence, okay? And in this case, the European Court of Human Rights said that you don't need to call for violence. It doesn't have to, incitement to hatred does not necessarily need to have a call for violence. Insults, ridicule, defamation aimed at specific populations like immigrants or the LGBT community are enough for a violation of free speech, right? in my opinion, that's absolutely horrific, because there can also, not only on free speech issues, but there can also be an impact on the rise of the far right. If they don't have somewhere to voice their opinions, they can actually subsequently manifest them in physical harm. And anyone who's interested in that, I would suggest Ravndal, Jakob Ravndal. He's in Norway, he's a political scientist, and he looks at the correlation, particularly in Western and Northern Europe, of how the far right or racist rhetoric will rise when speech is restricted. I mean, Freud, it's a very Freudian thing as well. Freud said we need to talk, so we need to vent, so we don't go like beating each other up. Okay, I'm finishing now. I should finish, so so we can have a discussion. Greece is also a member of the United Nations. Article 20 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is part of Greek law, and that article prohibits any advocacy of national or racial or religious hatred that may cause violence. What am I trying to say? That all throughout the years, Greece did have the legal formula, whether that be the anti-racist law they had, whether that be relying on the international law that they had incorporated into their national law. We have an EU framework decision on racism and xenophobia, which wants us to punish a racist motivation in terms of a crime. It wants us to punish hate speech. That's the EU framework decision. I won't go into too much detail. But it wasn't doing it. Now, what could we say as a conclusion? Constitutional issues about the dismantling of political party are significant in Greece, because we don't actually have a process for that. The only thing that they could do at the end of the day was look at individual fault in terms of running and establishing a criminal organization or a terrorist organization. They chose the criminal organization, as they did with 17th of November. And yeah, so where are we at now? We need to look at Greece as a case study, I think, of the far right. To understand that we mustn't just throw around the term populism so easily, and far right populism. I cannot compare Michaliagos with, I don't know, yeah, or, you know, it's a huge difference. Secondly, yes, the Greek state made many errors and left Golden Dawn to go untempered for a long time. Yes, the police was wrongly not recording racist crimes where it should be. Yes, in 2013, when an ethnic Greek was killed, things changed, right? But we have to bear in mind the constitutional limitations of the country and the history of the country, and learn from them so that these mistakes are not remade. Way forward, if you were to say, okay, what could be the way forward? We need to have proper reporting. We need to have a strong civil society in Greece for this kind of counter-speech and counter-narrative. When the left fell and civil society weakened, we gave the space, because these kind of institutions and organizations, they are also about space. Space in the city, space in the suburbs, space at the uni, space at the whatever else. And once the other side, or the activist side, starts giving up space in certain areas, they were then inhabited by the fascist element, right? So that would be my recommendation, and I've tried to say too much, so I'm going to stop.
Thank you very much, Natalie. We've covered a lot of ground here, and there are many different perspectives that we can perhaps follow for the Q&A. So let's begin with questions from the attendees here in the room. And if people who are watching this online want to ask Natalie something, please use the Q&A button on Zoom to post your question, and then I will read it out to Natalie. Any questions here? Yes, please.
Hi, just very interesting. Thank you. And I would like to understand, and maybe you can describe it briefly, what was the transition from magazines, newspapers to a party? And then was this transition to an organization and then to a party, or it was both organization and a party? Do they have like youth movement? And then who are the members? Is it the same members, both in organization and the party? And then I know they were banned. So did the government ban them only as a political party or an organization as well? And then what can they do, Can they recreate themselves in a different, alternative or?
Yeah, okay, so that's, an excellent point, and the point that is concerning a lot of us. So how they transcended, they started off as a magazine, which was written predominantly by Natalie Alkiviadou, just his ideas. And through that magazine, they gained quite a bit of support. Other people with similar ideas, they would join together, they would meet. They started off very, very on the grassroots level, let's say, yeah? Then, Natalie Alkiviadou said, okay, we're going to form this, since we're meeting, we've shared our ideas, you like what I'm saying, other people could start writing in the magazine, blah, blah. They declared themselves as a political party, which is a very easy process. In Greece, simply you declare that you align with the democratic principles you give in a constitution, and no one actually checks later. Now, what you say is very, very important, and this is where I would direct you to the readings of Cass Sunstein. How do you pronounce his name? Sunstein, who he differentiates between a political party, a non-party group, and a subculture milieu, not only in relation to Golden Dawn, in different entities that have to do with the far right. And this is exactly what happened with Golden Dawn, because they were functioning as a political party, but at the same time, that political party led by Natalie Alkiviadou was also the same framework through which the hit squads were organized. So every hit squad would have
like a leader, right?
Create chapters.
Yes.
So they created chapters around Greece.
Exactly. Where they would have, okay, I have this area of Athens, you have this area of Athens, you have this area of Athens. X is the leader here, Y is the leader there, Z is the leader here. Of the hit squads, which was part of the subculture milieu, was not at all associated formally with the political party, but the big guy for both the political party and the functioning of these was the same person.
Very interesting, yeah.
Yeah. And this is why the Golden Dawn situation is very, very interesting in the way they managed those two things. So, and then you ask, okay, so yes, the National Judiciary of Greece said that, okay, they are a criminal organization, they got charged individually for running a criminal organization. They're now appealing things, they're a criminal organization. Can't they make a nuance? Anyway, what's happened has fragmented them quite a bit. Kasidiaris now with his new ideas for a new party and whatever. I don't know. I would never think that Golden Dawn is Golden Dawn. I remember when the trial started, they were just saying, yeah, okay, next day we're just going to form another party with another name, and that's fine. But because all this process has fragmented themselves anyway, what I could imagine would happen would be the onset of smaller parties from certain of the members making new ones. Are they prohibited? There is actually an article which prohibits, if you've been charged for certain years, or if you're already, if you're serving time for this, a violation of this article, you are prohibited from forming something, but Kasidiaris has gotten over that through getting someone else to sign some papers and whatever. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
George? Thank you so much. I want to ask, but I will limit myself to two questions. So the organization is Is there a cell structure to them? Do they know each other? Do they know the regional leaders, who everybody else is, or are they structured in a way to prevent recognition should one of the cells, I'm assuming they're calling themselves now, should one of the groups, regional groups, be recognized and persecuted by the police? Is there a way to isolate themselves from each other? Do women take a part at all in this, and are their activities different from the men? And at the very end, maybe you can say something about the relationship with the Cypriot group.
We might reconsider putting this on.
Answer one question.
No, yeah, it's fine. So now, in terms of the hit squads, different groupings, they had a cell structure. Okay, they have now been, because of the trial, because of the fact that the police actually cracked down on them, that they have been, well, what's the word? Diluted. After the imprisonment of Golden, we had a couple of new groupings working on the streets, especially in Athens, but nothing like it used to be. So that's the one thing in terms of hit squad. The second thing in terms of the hit squad, and this is where, particularly in the region of Athens, there was a lot of collaboration, not only amongst themselves, but also with the police. And you can hear that if you watch the documentary on the night where Pavlos Pisas was killed, so that would be the other thing. So that's the thing with the hit squad. Women definitely play a major role. There's a documentary about the women of Golden Dawn, and Michaloiako's daughter, Urania, she's always been at the side of her father. She now runs his radio show while he's in prison. She's running the show quite a bit. Their role is very much in terms of the values that the Golden Dawn wants to sell. Family values, women support more Greek children being born. At the same time, definitely giving them a voice, going and speaking, at different tea parties, quite a few tea parties at the time. But I think that they were there predominantly to come and reinstate this idea and attract other women who had been disheartened either because of losing their job or any other social or family issues. That would be their role particularly. They are though trained also, the hit squad that went to the Egyptian fishermen, I think, I don't know if she was the leader, but one of them there, it was a staunchly trained violence hit squad member. So they were also militants. And the third thing, Elan, the National Populist Front in Cyprus, we now have 4 members of parliament in our parliament, doubled from the time before. Of course, following the trial, the leader of Elan, our kind of, people call it an equivalent, but it's not really an equivalent. I don't think we could get an equivalent of Golden Dawn. I don't think our country, our population, our size, our makeup could really handle that. They started off, they wanted to register as Golden Dawn Cyprus. The leader of Golden Dawn, he used to be a bodyguard from Michaloiakos. He learned a lot of the tricks from Mother Greece. He now leads the political party there in parliament. They've toned down their message a lot. They've distanced themselves from Golden Dawn. They even removed the link to Golden Dawn's website, which is now done anyway, from their website. So they did those kind of activities. But at at the end of the day, they are an aggressively nationalist party. At all at the scale that we saw at Golden Dawn, and I don't know if it will grow, but don't forget that the history of Cyprus means that we also have racist rhetoric very deeply embedded in our mainstream parties.
Do they reference EOKA, Vita, at all?
Vita, they reference EOKA,
Period.
period. And they're always at the, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting my English name, memorials, thank you.
Of the EOKA.
Of leaders who were, for our country, a little bit controversial.
Well, you should explain the attendees what EOKA is, right?
No, not me.
Wow.
My mum's English, come on. Kidding.
Well, EOKA was this paramilitary, I guess, group that was part of the struggle of liberation of Cyprus from Turkey, right? Or
British.
From the British, sorry, the first stage, and then the second stage was a bit more sinister. It had to do, the allegations of massacres against Muslims in Cyprus, or Turks in Cyprus, whatever you want to call them. While the first part of the history is more like mainstream, I guess, in Cyprus, EOKA 2 is more controversial.
And I think that a lot of the aspects of the activities of the first yoga have not been, we have never really been properly taught or understood their role.
Or Vita.
How-
Or Vita. EOKA Vita. EOKA, the second one.
Yeah.
And I mean, the biggest sort of complicity is the coup in 1974. So you mentioned about police. What about the weapons that they have?
Ooh,
The Golden Dawn, did it have an armory? Did it have,
where they got their weapons
did
from.
they have
Did
weapons?
they have any
They
weapons?
have
That's the
weapons.
question.
And
What kind of weapons?
And are those a matter is it addressing or to
Well,
disarm them?
I don't know.
I don't think they ever found a stash of weapons.
Yeah.
It was mostly knives and bats and stuff like that, right? Firearms, not really.
But since you mentioned the website, which I had seen when I actually managed to download some things before they shut it down. Who shut it down? They did or the state or
I think they did.
they did?
Let me just say something about the weapons. This is interesting, and it goes back to what you asked before about the political party and the fact they were subculture. In the documentary, you see one of the member of parliaments getting into his car. This was before they were sent to jail, and he has a pistol on him. So the guy's like, "What? You're going around with a pistol?" And he's like, "Yeah, we're allowed it now for self-protection." Because of that status, the first status, and why not? So that's also interesting in terms of their own,
Is it in English?
Yes, I can send them over, it's very interesting. And also, there's been a lot written, but it's hearsay, so I don't know about where they were getting their, proper weapons from. But
Yugoslavia is the
I don't know,
first.
I haven't, being able, but I do know that they did also have heavy, not just knives and.
Are there any?
Can I ask something about you covered mainly like major issues here, like the murders, the international organizations that are involved, the articles of our constitution and the law in Greece and internationally. And then at some point you bring in the big Communist Party, right? And you told us how fearful they were of, prohibition because I guess they thought that they would be next or something like that, right? Or the history of being prohibited for so many years. Why is the Greek Communist Party an important aspect of the story here? Why do you feel the need to add it to the narrative? I mean, it doesn't sound like a central issue here, right?
I
It
think,
seems like it's coming out of the blue. What's the rationale?
okay, the rationale is three things. Number one, the timing. Remember when we said about timing, it's very difficult when you're going to actually prohibit a political party. Because if you were going to do it when they were getting tens of thousands of votes and they had 20 hit squads a night just in one area of Athens, then that would have been trouble because all those supporters, they would have come out to the system as scapegoats, and all the supporters would have gone where? Underground. I mean, that would be very worrying. At the time when there was a discussion in the parliament about banning Golden Dawn in the 90s, and also with what happened with Periandros in 96 and whatever, that potentially, because that was before people really knew them, before they had electoral support, that potentially could have been a better period to crack down on them, although they would have come up as something else.
Exactly, yeah.
So that there was the discussion, the political discussion in the parliament.
Okay.
The reason I mention the Communist Party is because a lot of the targets of Golden Dawn were leftists, not necessarily of the Greek Communist Party, but leftist unions, students groups, they suffered at their hands. They really did.
Okay.
I find it very interesting and very just how history forms us and how history impacts us, that the Greek Communist Party, although recognized and inherently did not endorse an activity of a far-right grouping. I don't support any party at the moment, but I'm just saying what I did. I find it very interesting that they stuck to the principle of non-prohibition very adamantly in the parliament. I'm not saying it was important in the story.
So why do you find it interesting? What's your hunch here?
Well, there's a structural fear, it looks like, from the left, historically, that the state has a long arm.
I mean, that's the obvious thing, right?
But whatever left-wing extreme activity, which seems to have waned, or at least not much that is reported, when was 17th of November disbanded? Because it looks like to me, a non-political person, by studies in person, I guess, that, in the 80s, it was left-wing. And then we had this period in the 90s when I'm not quite sure what.
Human violence,
Yes.
political violence.
Yes, but it looks like the political violence is now coming from the right and less so from the left.
You're talking about Greece or in general?
I mean, in general, it's the case in Europe.
In general, we can see that in recent years, like for the 5 last years, let's say, we can see the far-right terrorism.
Yeah.
Even the index of terrorism, like terrorism index, can show it. The appearance, it grew by more than 200%.
Yeah.
The violence of far-right terrorism.
In Europe?
So
Or globally?
even in the United States, like in West, yes.
Of course, United
So
States.
that's why it's like- Yeah. My name is Liram. I'm a visiting researcher here at the sociology department. And in Israel, I'm a senior researcher in the Institute of Counterterrorism. And I'm the head of the far-right extremism desk at the Institute. So, yeah.
And you tell us your name too?
And what?
Your name.
My name, Liram Koblenz. Yeah.
Very good comment.
So it's fascinating phenomenon, like the far right. Yeah.
Any follow-up questions?
The question of freedom of speech. It's easy to ban a magazine in Greece. What are the powers of the state or even of the European Union to regulate the internet? So the website is down, but what prevents them from setting it up to another server ready?
Vassiliadis is tweeting from prison.
Yes. So all of the media, social media is.
Yeah, and this is I'd love to come back for another lecture on this, but just very briefly. In Greece, we've had two, just mention one very interesting case of a historian, an academic, His name is Heinz Richter. He was a German academic who worked on Greece and Cyprus. And he wrote this book, can't remember the name now, about the Battle of Crete. And he portrayed the Cretans, Cretans, as quite violent when the Nazis came, and they had also committed atrocities, yeah? He went to court, they took his book, he was gonna go to jail, because then they remembered, you know, the free speech, hate speech, the anti-racist law and all the, right, okay, at the end, of course, not of course, but thankfully the court let him go. And there were huge demonstrations outside the court in Crete, I don't remember in which city. It was a huge thing. So that book, they did try to ban it and to, in Greece, and to get him with a penalty or in jail. Same happened with Blevins, with his Jews, The Whole Truth. If you read it, you want to be sick from the anti-Semitism and the revisionism and what the Holocaust denial. I mean, and he went to court, and upon appeal, they decided not to proceed. But the argument with free speech is, if you believe that the Holocaust didn't happen, obviously there's something wrong with you. I mean, you must be, if you have anti-Semitic feelings or you believe that a major historical event is just a lie, and but if that book is to exist in Greece, what is the real impact of it actually existing? This is the liberal approach to freedom of expression. The problem with the internet, though, is that the way that the EU, because it is the EU that's trying to regulate the internet now, we have this new Digital Services Act. I'll tell you very briefly. Its political agreement has been reached. It's going to be out next year. It's this huge piece of legislation which forces internet companies to quickly remove content which is even discriminatory, which is content that is considered illegal in the country, which makes me very afraid of things like Hungary, Poland, and what they consider to be legal. Look at the gay propaganda laws, for example, going on in Central Europe. Although in the latest version of the DSA, we have this thing in bold that says, as long as the national law is in compliance with EU law, whatever. And at the end of the day, the European Commission is going to be monitoring the private companies and being able to fine, so the non-elected body of the European Union, to fine these private businesses if they don't quickly remove speech which is considered illegal, which is hate speech, although we don't actually know what hate speech is, which is discriminatory. So it's a bit of a mess.
This might apply well for maybe a social media company, but how does an internet provider monitor every website that is set up through their servers?
They don't, they receive
Complaints has to come from the public.
Yeah, and a lot of the people like Eric Zundel and his Zundel site, I don't know if you ever, the revisionist anti-Semitic guy, he would always have a host in the US because of the First Amendment issues. And you have Section 230 of the Decency Act, which might also change.
I'm not going to ask questions, the personal one.
Okay. All right, thank you very, very much. It's been a pleasure, Natalie, to host you. We learned a lot, and I hope our guests join us for our future events. Thank you very much again. Enjoy your rest of the day. Take care.
We're off the air now. Can I ask